The calculus professor called on the quiet woman in the back row, hoping to humiliate her in front of everyone. "Ms. Callahan, solve this equation now," he demanded with a smirk. Little did he know, Evelyn Callahan had been solving complex mathematical formulas since she was 12. As she approached the board and picked up the chalk, the classroom fell silent. What happened next would change everything. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Westmore University's mathematics building, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Evelyn Callahan clutched her worn leather notebook as she navigated the hallways, feeling conspicuously out of place among the students half her age. At 38, Evelyn stood out in the sea of 20-somethings, rushing between classes. Her simple white blouse and gray cardigan contrasted with the casual hoodies and trendy outfits surrounding her. She'd spent 20 years dreaming of this moment, returning to finish what she'd started before life took an unexpected turn. "Excuse me?" she said quietly, stepping aside as a group of laughing students hurried past. None of them noticed her, the invisible middle-aged woman trying to blend in. Room 307. Advanced Calculus with Dr. Howard Garner. Evelyn took a deep breath before entering. The lecture hall was imposing. Tiered seating facing a massive chalkboard, already covered with complex equations. She chose a seat near the front, arranging her notebooks methodically. "First day?" The young woman beside her smiled kindly. "First day back," Evelyn corrected with a small smile. "It's been a while." Before they could continue, the room fell silent as Dr. Garner entered. His reputation preceded him, brilliant, demanding, and notoriously difficult to impress. His silver hair and tailored suit projected authority, his piercing gaze sweeping the room as though assessing who would survive his course. "Welcome to Advanced Calculus." His voice filled the room without effort. "Look to your left, look to your right. One of those people won't be here by midterms." A nervous chuckle rippled through the class. Evelyn remained still, eyes forward. "This isn't remedial math," Dr. Garner continued, writing an equation on the board with practice strokes. "This is where we separate those who merely like mathematics from those who understand it." His eyes landed on Evelyn, lingering just long enough to make her uncomfortable. She recognized that look, the one questioning her presence, wondering if she'd wandered into the wrong room. As Dr. Garner launched into his lecture, Evelyn's hand moved across her notebook, transcribing his words but also adding notes in the margins, corrections, alternative approaches, connections to theoretical concepts he hadn't mentioned. "Ms. Dr. Garner suddenly paused, looking directly at Evelyn. "Callahan, Evelyn Callahan," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Ms. Callahan, you disagree with my approach?" He'd noticed her writing independently of his lecture. "No, sir, just taking notes." His lips tightened, eyes narrowing slightly. "I see. Well, Ms. Callahan, perhaps you'd like to share your notes with the class tomorrow." The dismissal in his tone was unmistakable. Evelyn nodded once, knowing the challenge had just begun. By the end of the first week, Evelyn had established a routine. She arrived early, reviewed her notes from the previous session, and prepared for Dr. Garner's increasingly pointed questions. "You worked in insurance, was it?" he asked one morning, glancing at her registration information. "Accounting," Evelyn corrected quietly. "For a manufacturing company." Quite a leap to advance theoretical mathematics." His tone suggested the leap was too great. The whispers had started too, students wondering why she was there, what had brought her back to school at her age. Evelyn ignored them, focusing instead on the elegant dance of numbers and theories she'd loved since childhood. In the faculty lounge, Dr. Harriet Powell overheard conversations about the older woman in Garner's class. "Howard seems determined to drive her out," remarked Professor Jenkins, stirring his coffee. Harriet frowned. "That's hardly fair. Has he even given her a chance?" "You know Howard," Jenkins shrugged. "He's decided who belongs in his classroom before the semester even starts." Later that day, Harriet observed Evelyn sitting alone in the mathematics library, surrounded by advanced texts well beyond the course requirements. Curious, she approached. "Heavy reading for week 1, she commented, noting the titles on non-Euclidean geometry and complex analysis. Evelyn looked up, slightly startled. "Oh, just refreshing my memory. It's been a while since..." "I'm Dr. Powell, differential equations. Harriet extended her hand. Evelyn Callahan. They shook hands. You're in Howard's class? How's that going? Evelyn's polite smile revealed nothing. It's challenging, as it should be. Harriet studied her for a moment. You know, we have a faculty colloquium next week. Graduate students sometimes attend. You might find it interesting. Thank you, but I'm not sure Dr. Garner would. I'm inviting you, Harriet smiled. Tuesday, 4 p.m., Matheson Hall. Back in class, Doctor. Garner seemed determined to find Evelyn's breaking point. His questions to her were more complex, his responses to her answers curt and dismissive. Ms. Callahan, perhaps you could explain to the class where you're struggling with this concept. It might help the others who are too shy to admit their confusion. Evelyn looked up from her notes, meeting his gaze directly. I understand the concept, Dr. Garner. I was just considering an alternative approach to the proof. His eyebrows rose slightly. An alternative approach? How novel. The sarcasm wasn't lost on anyone. I'd be fascinated to hear it. Tomorrow, perhaps. The challenge hung in the air between them. Evelyn nodded once, knowing this was the moment he'd been waiting for, the opportunity to publicly establish her inadequacy. I'll be prepared, she said quietly. Unai, Tuesday afternoon, found Evelyn in the back row of Matheson Hall, listening as faculty members presented their current research. Dr. Powell had noticed her enter and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Most of the other attendees were graduate students, huddled together in small groups, occasionally glancing curiously at the unfamiliar face. Dr. Garner was the final presenter, discussing his work on applications of multidimensional calculus. Evelyn listened intently, her notebook open, occasionally jotting down observations. She noticed a small inconsistency in his approach, nothing that invalidated his conclusions, but an inefficiency in his methodology that could be refined. As the presentations concluded and attendees mingled over coffee, Evelyn debated leaving quietly. Dr. Powell intercepted her. What did you think? She asked, gesturing toward where Dr. Garner was holding court with several admiring graduate students. It was fascinating, Evelyn replied diplomatically. But Harriet's eyes were perceptive. Evelyn hesitated. His approach to the integration sequence was traditional. You see another way? Before Evelyn could respond, Dr. Garner himself approached, his expression cooling as he recognized Evelyn. Ms. Callahan, this is unexpected. Undergraduate students rarely attend these sessions. I invited her, Dr. Powell interjected smoothly. Evelyn was just sharing some thoughts on your integration sequence. Dr. Garner's smile tightened. Was she indeed? And what revolutionary insights has Ms. Callahan gleaned from her extensive experience in accounting, wasn't it? The condescension hung heavily in the air. Several nearby conversations quieted as people turned to observe the exchange. I merely noted that the tertiary function could be simplified, Evelyn said quietly. It would reduce the computational steps significantly. Dr. Garner's laugh was short and dismissive. If it could be simplified, don't you think someone would have done so in the decades this approach has been taught? Someone with, perhaps, more than a week of formal education in advanced calculus. Harriet frowned. Howard, no, it's quite all right, he continued, eyes fixed challengingly on Evelyn. In fact, this is perfect timing. Miss Callahan was going to dazzle us with her alternative approach tomorrow anyway. Perhaps she'd like to share her insights with the class right now. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet. Graduate students exchanged glances, some embarrassed, others curious. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. Part of her wanted to leave, to escape the hostile scrutiny. But a stronger part, the part that had solved complex equations late at night after her daughter had gone to sleep, the part that had never stopped learning even when life had forced her to pause her formal education. That part stood firm. If you have a chalkboard available, she said evenly, I'd be happy to demonstrate. Dr. Garner's smile was predatory. By all means. The following day, tension hung in the air of room 307. Word had spread quickly about the confrontation at the faculty colloquium. Students whispered as they took their seats, glancing between Dr. Garner, who stood rigidly at the podium, and Evelyn, who sat quietly reviewing her notes. Before we begin today's lecture, Dr. Garner announced, his voice carrying an edge, Ms. Callahan has volunteered to demonstrate her alternative approach to a standard integration sequence. The word volunteered drew a few knowing smirks from students who'd heard what actually happened. Ms. Callahan, the floor is yours. He gestured to the board with exaggerated courtesy. Evelyn stood, gathering her notes. As she walked to the front, she felt every eye in the room following her progress. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady. This was familiar territory. The world of numbers and equations had always made sense to her, even when little else did. At the board, she faced the class. Some students looked sympathetic, others skeptical, a few openly amused. In the doorway, partially hidden, Dr. Powell stood watching silently. Dr. Garner sat at his desk, arms crossed. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Callahan, do enlighten us." Evelyn turned to the board and began. Her handwriting was neat, methodical, as she laid out the standard approach first, explaining each step clearly. Then she paused, chalk poised. "The traditional method requires 12 distinct operations," she said, voice growing stronger. "But if we consider the relationship between these functions differently." She began working through her alternative approach. The chalk moved confidently across the board, defining a pathway that few in the room had considered. The initial skepticism in the room gradually shifted to attention, then to genuine interest. Dr. Garner's smug expression faltered as Evelyn's solution progressed. He leaned forward, scrutinizing her work, searching for errors. Finding none, his frown deepened. "This can't be right," he interrupted. "You've skipped essential steps." "I haven't skipped them," Evelyn replied calmly. "I've rendered them unnecessary by reframing the relationship between these variables." She continued writing, explaining as she went. From the doorway, Dr. Powell smiled slightly, recognizing the elegant solution unfolding before them. A student in the front row whispered audibly to his neighbor, "Is she actually right?" "I think she is," came the astonished reply. Evelyn completed her demonstration, circling her final result. 7 operations instead of 12, with identical results. She set down the chalk and turned to face Dr. Garner. "The traditional approach works perfectly well, of course. This is simply an alternative perspective." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Garner stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. He approached the board, examining Evelyn's work with laser focus. The class remained silent, collectively holding their breath. "This approach," he finally said, his voice tight, "while unconventional, appears to arrive at the correct solution." He turned to face Evelyn. "Where did you encounter this method, Ms. Callahan?" Evelyn met his gaze steadily. "I didn't encounter it, I developed it." A ripple of whispers swept through the classroom. Dr. Garner's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Developed it?" His tone remained skeptical. This sort of methodological innovation typically emerges from years of specialized research. "Yes," Evelyn agreed quietly. "It does." From the doorway, Dr. Powell stepped fully into the room. "Howard, may I?" Without waiting for permission, she addressed the class. "What Ms. Callahan has demonstrated is remarkably similar to the approach outlined in a paper published in the Journal of Mathematical Analysis last year, a paper that caused quite a stir in our field for its elegant simplification of traditional computational methods." Students straightened in their seats, eyes darting between the 3 adults at the front of the room. "The paper," Dr. Powell continued, "was published under the pseudonym E.C. Reynolds." She looked directly at Evelyn. "A pseudonym that has appeared on 6 increasingly influential papers over the past decade, despite no one knowing the author's actual identity." Dr. Garner's expression shifted from skepticism to confusion, then to dawning realization as he looked at Evelyn. "You're claiming to be E.C. Reynolds?" Evelyn nodded once, her composure never wavering. "I needed to publish anonymously. Without formal credentials, I knew my work wouldn't be taken seriously otherwise." A student in the back raised her hand tentatively. "Wait, E.C. Reynolds? My undergraduate thesis advisor had us all study those papers. He said they represented the future of computational theory." "I've read those papers too," another student added. "They're brilliant." Dr. Garner seemed momentarily at a loss for words, an unfamiliar state for the typically verbose professor. His eyes traveled from Evelyn to the board where her solution still stood, elegant in its simplicity. "Why are you here?" he finally asked, genuine confusion in his voice. If you're truly E.C. Reynolds, you could be lecturing, not sitting in my classroom. Because I want the credentials to match the knowledge, Evelyn replied simply. Because my daughter finally has her chance at college, and now it's my turn. Because I've spent 20 years learning in stolen moments, and I want to do it properly. The classroom remained silent as the implications settled. Dr. Powell smiled slightly, watching as Dr. Garner confronted his own prejudices in real time. Well, he said finally, adjusting his tie, it seems we have much to discuss, Ms. Callahan. News traveled quickly through Westmore's mathematics department. By the following week, the story of Evelyn Callahan, the unassuming returning student who was actually the mysterious E.C. Reynolds, had spread throughout the faculty and graduate student body. Dr. Garner's approach to Evelyn underwent a subtle but unmistakable shift. The pointed questions designed to expose weaknesses were replaced by more thoughtful inquiries. His dismissive tone gave way to something resembling professional courtesy, though pride prevented a complete transformation. Ms. Callahan, he said at the conclusion of Friday's lecture, I've been reviewing your paper on nonlinear differential equations. There's a section on page 42 that I'd like to discuss, if you have time. Students exchanged glances as Evelyn nodded. The same professor who had tried to humiliate her was now seeking her input. After class, several students approached Evelyn's desk. Ms. Callahan? A young woman with glasses fidgeted nervously. I'm having trouble with the concepts from last week. Some of us have a study group, and we were wondering if maybe you'd join us. To explain things? Evelyn smiled gently. Of course. When do you meet? In the faculty lounge, Dr. Powell found Dr. Garner staring contemplatively out the window. You're not the first to underestimate her, Howard, she said, pouring herself coffee. Though you might be the first to admit it. He frowned slightly. I haven't admitted anything. Your body language has, the way you address her now, the fact that you're reading her papers. Harriet smiled. It's almost like you respect her. She's been working at an advanced level without formal training or guidance, he admitted reluctantly. That's noteworthy. It's exceptional, Harriet corrected. And she did it while raising a child alone and working full-time. Dr. Garner's frown deepened. Why are you telling me this? Because she's going to need a thesis advisor next year, someone who can challenge her, someone whose recommendation will carry weight. He raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting me, after I spent weeks trying to drive her out of my classroom? I'm suggesting you precisely because of that, Harriet replied. You've seen your own prejudices now, and you're still the best in the department for the areas she's exploring. In the following days, Evelyn found herself in an unexpected position. Students began approaching her for help, sitting near her in class, inviting her to join their discussions. Faculty members, who had previously looked through her, now stopped to introduce themselves. Dr. Garner observed these changes from a distance, watching as the woman he had dismissed as an out-of-place housewife playing at academics gradually became a central figure in his classroom's intellectual landscape. During one session, as Evelyn patiently explained a complex theorem to a group of struggling students, he found himself thinking that perhaps he had something to learn from her after all. 3 weeks later, Dr. Garner stood before the department's curriculum committee, outlining his proposal for the spring semester. Seated among the faculty members was Evelyn, invited as a special consultant due to her unique perspective as both student and published researcher. The traditional sequence has served us well, Dr. Garner concluded, but I believe we must consider evolving our approach. He glanced briefly at Evelyn. Recent methodological innovations suggest we may be doing our students a disservice by not incorporating more efficient computational frameworks. Dr. Jenkins, the department chair, leaned forward. Correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, but aren't you essentially proposing we adopt the E.C. Reynolds approach? The same approach you dismissed as amateur speculation last year. A few uncomfortable chuckles circulated through the room. Dr. Garner cleared his throat. I've reconsidered my position in light of new evidence, he said stiffly. Academic integrity demands we follow the research, regardless of personal opinions. Or personal biases, Dr. Powell added quietly. The meeting concluded with tentative approval for Dr. Garner's proposed changes. As faculty members filtered out, he approached Evelyn, who was gathering her notes. Ms. Callahan, a moment? She looked up, her expression neutral. Yes, Professor? The department is hosting a symposium next month on evolutionary approaches to calculus instruction. Given your unique perspective, your contribution would be valuable. Evelyn studied him for a moment. Are you asking me to present alongside faculty? I'm asking you to co-present with me, he clarified, the words clearly difficult for him. Your practical applications complement my theoretical framework. The significance wasn't lost on either of them. This was more than a professional courtesy. It was a public acknowledgement of her expertise, a formal integration into the academic community that had initially rejected her. Later that afternoon, Evelyn led her first official student help session. What had begun as an informal gathering had grown to include nearly half of Dr. Garner's class. The trick isn't memorizing formulas, she explained to the attentive group. It's understanding the relationships between functions. As she guided them through increasingly complex problems, Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what she had dreamed of during those late nights at her kitchen table, working through advanced mathematics by lamplight after her daughter had gone to bed. From the corridor, Dr. Garner observed the session briefly. The woman he had tried to humiliate was now teaching his students, explaining his material more effectively than he sometimes did himself. He turned away, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Howard Garner was not a man who admitted mistakes easily, but he knew when he had been outmaneuvered, mathematically and otherwise. 6 months later, Evelyn stood at the front of a packed lecture hall in the mathematics building. The departmental colloquium had drawn faculty and students from across the university, attracted by the first public appearance of the now revealed E.C. Reynolds. Dr. Garner sat in the front row, watching as she confidently navigated the presentation of her latest research. Her elegant explanations and intuitive approaches to complex problems kept even non-specialists engaged. And so we find, she concluded, that by reconceptualizing these relationships, we open new pathways for both theoretical exploration and practical application. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As questions began, Dr. Garner noted with satisfaction the respect in his colleagues' voices when they addressed her. No one questioned her right to be there anymore. Her brilliance had earned her place. When the formal session ended, Dr. Garner approached her at the podium. "Congratulations, Evelyn," he said, using her first name for the first time. "That was masterfully presented." "Thank you, Howard," she replied with a small smile. He hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology. My initial assessment of you was—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Incorrect," she offered. "Profoundly incorrect," he acknowledged. "I allowed preconceptions to cloud my judgment." Evelyn considered him for a moment. "You know, in mathematics, we revise our hypotheses when new data contradicts them. It's not a failure, it's part of the process." "A rather generous interpretation of my behavior," he noted dryly. "I've had plenty of practice being underestimated," she replied. "It taught me to recognize the value of people who can change their minds." As they walked together toward his office to discuss her upcoming thesis proposal, Dr. Garner reflected that his most important lesson this year hadn't come from a textbook or research paper, but from the quiet woman he had mistakenly tried to humiliate. If this story moved you, remember that brilliance comes in all forms and appearances. Have you ever been underestimated or witnessed someone else's hidden talents emerge? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us never to judge a book by its cover or a mathematician by her quiet demeanor.